Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. And I have such a treat for you today. This is one of my favorite conversations ever, and I think you're going to love it as much as I did. Today's guest is Dr. Dan Ratner, who is a psychologist who specializes in the treatment of neural circuit or neuroplastic pain and other symptoms. Dan has been doing this for a long time, and in the process of working with hundreds and hundreds of clients, he's developed a way of communicating the entire recovery process into a very structured format that I think so many of you are going to find useful, especially if you're new here and trying to figure out how to integrate all the different tools I talk about in all these different 15-minute videos into one coherent plan. You're going to find this conversation useful no matter what, but especially for those of you who are dealing with a lot of doubt about your ability to recover, fears that somehow you're different, fears that somehow the doctors missed something or that there's something particularly wrong with you or that you're too afraid of fear. These are all doubts I've heard before. And again, you're going to hear some tools today for how to work with them. If you find this conversation as awesome as I did, I think you're also going to love Dan's new book, Crushing Doubt. You can find links to purchase that book in the video description and in the podcast description below. Also, please leave your questions and comments below if you're watching here on YouTube, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can head over to YouTube to let us know what you think. And if you have more questions that we could maybe answer in a part 2, please also like, share, subscribe to my channel, follow the podcast, leave us a 5-star rating. All of these things help me reach more people. All right, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Dan Ratner. Dr. Dan Ratner, thank you so much for joining us. I am thrilled to meet you and just thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Very excited to be here, and I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation just based on what I already know about you.
Oh, well, thank you again. You've been doing this for a long time. You're honestly a big name in the neural circuit world, so I'm a little starstruck having you on here. So totally mutual appreciation for each other going on right now. And I thought for those in my audience who don't know who you are, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your focus in the neural circuit world.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. I am a psychologist who has come to specialize in mind-body symptoms. And I got there originally from having 8 years of chronic everyday back pain that I had, and seriously, every moment. And I had no sense that I was going to get out of it. And like many people, I discovered Dr. John Sarno, and that was the beginning of me getting better. But I still had to ask a lot of questions to get answers. For me, it was hard. Sarno says you got to believe in the diagnosis to get better. And I'm all for that. I think he's completely right about that. But for some people, myself included, that means we got to get a lot of answers. So I've come to specialize in working with what I call doubt. Doubt is a part of our thinking process that is natural. Everybody has doubt. But if we can't get them resolved, some of us, or really many of us, spin in that doubt. And we feel like we're never going to get anywhere. And what happens? Whatever's going on up here goes on down here throughout the body. So if you stay in doubt, it can keep those symptoms in place. So I've come to specialize in doubt. I do have a whole system that's not just doubt, that has these 3 areas where you can look at symptoms and understand each moment through that lens. And if you understand it through that lens, you can much better understand what you need to do about it. How are we going to change our thinking? How am I going to recognize my emotions? How am I going to align with myself? And the system teaches people how to understand those moments and get places really quickly. That's the basic gist.
Got it. Wonderful. So you're telling me the solution to doubt isn't just Googling endlessly and getting more information.
No, in fact, that will often lead to more doubt.
Absolutely.
Google's the worst.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a joke where I say the internet is where people go to dump fear.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, I'd love that you said that, because of course, people do have to find us from somewhere. And many times they're finding us in places on the internet that are full of fear. And they're like, they're traumatized by it. And they're seeking to help manage some of the doubts and fears that they had actually totally backfired, and they just got inundated with more messages of fear and doubt.
Well, absolutely. And one thing that I know about doubt is it can take one word or even a tone or just a look, and you can be off and running. So
Yeah.
the people that are going out there looking for information, a lot of times they get some good information. Very frequently they don't, unfortunately. But even when they get good information, they could get good information that has a sentence in it that makes them worry.
Mm.
And then it's like all that good work gets completely undermined by that doubt. And they're spending most of their time thinking about, but wait a minute, and I've had this happen in people who work with me. I'm always trying to crush doubt, of course. But sometimes I'll say something and they'll be like, but you didn't say you're 100% certain that time.
Right.
So
Right.
then I might need to say, well, I am 100% certain. Let's get at it. But we've got to have them articulate those doubts that pop up.
Yes.
Otherwise, they could spin in it endlessly.
And yes, both figuratively and in the case of people with dizziness, sometimes literally.
I used a good metaphor for this.
You did.
This podcast.
You did. Well, which brings me to really a very important question we need to put up front. So you had chronic pain. You work in the pain world a lot of the time. So I think I know the answer to this, but let's put it on record. Does the system that you're describing work for chronic dizziness, tinnitus, and hyperacusis, since those are the primary symptoms that people listening to my channel are going to be dealing with?
It works for all three, and it works very well. I've even done it myself. I've had all three of those symptoms at various points. So this is important to say. I'm not just someone who suffered from 8 years of back pain and then resolved it and otherwise just sails through my life. I'm someone who is I'm actually very symptomatic in a certain way, but I can manage these symptoms incredibly well now.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes bouts of vertigo and dizziness. I just to be clear, I don't have this often, but when I do, I know exactly what to do about it. In addition, I have treated people with chronic dizziness and gotten them down to no symptoms. I've
Right.
treated people with chronic tinnitus, gotten them down to no symptoms. Hyperacusis, I can also manage.
Mm-hmm.
That's, the way I think about it is that I don't really distinguish between what types of symptoms can be managed. The only symptoms that really can't be managed with mind-body work are symptoms that aren't mind-body symptoms. But most symptoms are mind-body symptoms.
Right.
And so my rule of thumb is this. If the body can do it, the mind can use it. It doesn't matter what system it is. So to me, vertigo is not different than back pain. I understand it is for the sufferer,
Yes.
and we may need to deal with certain belief systems about that particular symptom. But in the end, they all work the same.
Yeah. Okay. Question for you. Can you define what you mean by management? Because I just heard all the doubt alarms go off. So, because in my field, when doctors say something like management, what they're saying is you have chronic symptoms. You're going to have chronic symptoms for the rest of your life, and we're just going to try to make your life better while you're dealing with symptoms. So, is that the definition you're using for management?
And I'm so glad you asked that. So here's my definition of first of all, I don't even think in terms of the word management. If you notice, the word that I used was manage, but it's really easy for people with doubt to move into management because they've heard that, and that's exactly what happened here. So I'm so glad you're bringing that out.
I'm channeling all the doubt today.
You're doing great. And that's really what I ask, because I just say, just bring the doubt out. Let's take a look directly at it. So I don't think in terms of management. I don't have to manage my symptoms. What I mean by that is this. I have no chronic symptoms. None. You don't need to have chronic symptoms. They can all be gotten rid of. If I'm talking about management, what I'm talking about is in a given moment, if something pops up, an onset or an uptick of a symptom, I can get rid of it very quickly. So if we're talking what management is in my mind, it is no chronic symptoms, and it is mastery over acute ones.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which are completely normal experiences for anyone who is alive, period. whether
That's
you've
right.
had chronic symptoms before or not. Everyone has acute symptoms at some point, or sensations, really. I don't even know why we're calling them symptoms. They're just sensations. But everyone has acute sensations, and they are very often stress related or very often emotion related. So that's just a normal thing. And so what you're saying is, regardless whether it's pain, tinnitus, dizziness, hyperacusis, the things that we're talking about today, both in relation to doubts and in relation to the other pillars that I hope you'll also share with us, these things can help you get to the point where you no longer have chronic symptoms. You may have sensations in your life, because we all do, but we can get you out of chronic symptoms.
Absolutely. It is the human condition to have sensations. I like that you're making that distinction too. I don't even think of them as symptoms exactly, or if I do, I don't think of them in any way that I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm.
They're just experiences that we have. And my column system, which describes those three different areas, emotions, doubt, and power, we'll get into that soon.
Okay.
They describe how to understand a particular moment. And when you understand that moment, then you see these symptoms as just a signal of what's happening in these moments, and you know what to do about it. But just to make sure that any doubters out there hear this very clearly, you're not stuck with anything. There should be nothing chronic. And even these acute symptoms should come few and far between over time.
Yes.
But they're just something you can manage very quickly when
Right.
you know what we know.
Right. Excellent answer. And I'm so glad, again, I'm channeling all that doubt. So I'm going to continue to do that
Do
through
it.
our entire
Do it.
conversation.
That's what I'm here for.
My-
Channel
my
the doubt
hearing-
and I'll smash it.
I'm hearing them in my ears. Okay. So this actually seems like an excellent time to seg into what you just mentioned. So maybe you could tell us about all three pillars.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, let me say, I got to these ideas first through observation of myself. I read Sarno. I started thinking about, well, what's what here? How does this fit with what I'm seeing in my symptoms? Because I would have symptoms that were seemingly chronic, which they weren't. And I had symptoms that were onsets and upticks coming out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, well, they talk about emotions in the mind-body world, and Sarno talks about it, but he also talked about, you got to be certain about the diagnosis. So initially, I just had two columns. I had the doubt and emotions column as I looked at emotions and thinking. And then I came to see that there really was this important distinction, which is that the ups and downs, the comings and goings, they really did relate to my emotional life. Even if I wasn't consciously aware of it, I was able to retroactively look back and be like, oh yeah, there was something going on there. So the emotions column has come to be something that I understand as relating to the onsets and uptakes of symptoms.
Okay.
My 8 years of back pain, it wasn't because of 8 years of emotion. Not at all. It was because of an initial moment where I was having certain emotions. I can even tell you what it was, though I didn't know at the time. Then doubt took over. And doubt can take over in seconds. You can have an emotions column onset, and then doubt is like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble, and it's off and running. Doubt and that thinking process, especially if it remains unchanged, that's the thing that makes symptoms so that they are seemingly chronic. They're just either always there or very recurrent. So it's almost like a relay race. The emotions column is they start off, but they'll hand the baton off to doubt very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're off and running. Now, the power column is this third column that I didn't actually even discover until after I got better. When I got better, I started looking at my life in a very different way, because I had just gone from 8 years of debilitating back pain where I had no sense that I was going to get out, feeling honestly lesser than other people, and wondering why do I have this and they're living life freely, feeling that there was something wrong with me, and moving towards, oh, no. This is not about there's something wrong with me. There was something that I didn't know. I was never taught this. Society doesn't talk about this. And suddenly I felt very empowered. Suddenly I felt like, well, now I'm not lesser than other people. I actually know something more than other people. And I'm not saying that to brag, but it just gave me a sense of strong well-being about myself, that I wasn't broken. And so I started to see, oh, this is what it feels like to feel powerful. I haven't felt powerful. I suddenly realized I hadn't felt powerful my whole life. So I started looking at this other dimension. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. If I got to power from healing, from getting better from these issues, I don't even know if I like the word healing because it makes it sound like there's something wrong. When I got better, though, and made that breakthrough, I realized, well, why do we need to wait? We shouldn't need to wait to break through to symptoms to get to power. Maybe I can use this. So then I started working, as I was working with people, having gotten better myself, I started using the 2 columns initially, but I was working with a woman and she was getting better. Her doubt was coming down, but she hit a plateau. When we were just stuck there for a while, and I was kind of wondering why. And I was thinking about power. And power, by the way, I should define. It is a good relationship with the self.
Oh, okay. I'm so glad that was going to be a big question of mine. I feel, first of all, just so validated right now. Dan, this is something I talk about so much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Relationship to self. I'm so sorry to go on. Promise this is very short tangent.
Go
Someone asked me yesterday, he basically like summarized everything he had learned in my course. And then he was like, so what you're saying is this. And I'm like, no, it's not about symptoms. It's about relating to all of your experiences better regardless, like not symptoms, emotions, thoughts, experiences, needs. It's about having a different relationship with yourself, period. That to me is what is the conclusion. Oh my gosh, please continue.
So my back pain fundamentally changed my relationship with me from all kinds of understandings. And having that in mind, as I was talking to this patient, I said, okay, is there some part of you that feels like you're not in a good space with yourself then about this process? And she said something really interesting to me. She said, I don't want my symptoms to be mind body. And I was like, really? Why not? Because here I am thinking, well, this means we can get rid of them. So, but she said to me, because if it's mind body, it means it's my fault.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Now listen, I don't agree with that assessment at all. And I didn't at the time. Of course,
people feel that way though.
But people do feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that if it came from my mind, then it's my fault. So I have a line about that. Here's the line that I came up with shortly after that, and I've used ever since. Just because you're the cure doesn't mean you're the cause.
I love that. Yeah.
So we got to talking about it, and what I said to her is like, look, you came to have these symptoms because of a psychological process that unfolded based on what you had learned. You had lots of trauma. No one was telling you that these symptoms could come from that trauma. Instead, they were telling you they were from structural things. There were so many building blocks that built this psychological experience that had nothing to do with you or any choices you could make. Not your fault. And yet, now that we know what we know, you can cure this. That opened the door for her. That was a power column breakthrough. And so power, even though it is about having that good relationship with yourself, you can have power with yourself. You can also have power with others, and you can have power with your symptoms.
Yes.
All of it relates back to the self. But what I started to do is to start to use this column to recognize plateaus. Aha, you're now, instead of just onsets and upticks and the seemingly chronic, there's also these plateaus.
Yes. Wow.
Now I've got 3 ways to recognize what's happening with the symptoms and why. And then we can dive in and do the work in each of those columns.
Yeah. First of all, so I'm noticing, I just want to clarify this for people who are used to some of the terminology that I use. And I can see that you're big on the use of language. So I relish having this conversation with you. It sounds like doubt is what I would normally call maybe danger mode or like fear-based reactions. And I mean, that's not all that it is, right? But that's kind of the parallel. And then it sounds like relationship to self is what I will sometimes kind of casually refer to as safety, which I know is an annoying word and people hate it, which is why I really like how you defined this. This is actually a much better definition. But I think what you're describing though, and I want to frame this for people who are used to hearing me talk about it, is basically what you're saying is we're getting you out of a fear cycle and into a cycle in which you feel empowered and safe. And essentially that's exactly the same mechanism that I talk about for dealing with dizziness or other symptoms in all the rest of my material content, course, etc. Would you agree with that assessment?
I totally agree. I mean, there are some specifics that I can get in there, which I will in a second, but I think in the mind-body field, we're really all speaking the same language in some way. It's
Yeah.
moving from a sense of danger to a sense of safety, peace, calmness, alignment, whatever we want to call it.
Yes.
And it can happen in many different ways. One thing I like about my system is that it has multiple ways built into it. So sometimes you'll find in the mind-body world that they're like, do this. And I don't say that critically because it helps a
Sure.
lot of people, each
Yeah.
of these things. But then sometimes people say, well, what do I do when that's not working?
Right. I can
So
think of one example. Like,
tell me.
wait, I'm not indifferent enough. Like, how do I make myself be indifferent? How do
Oh,
I
I
make
know.
myself
How do I
not
do
care
it?
about the symptoms? How do I do it? Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, we need multiple solutions because our, who we are and our brains, the way they function is multifaceted. So if you are only using one tool, you're limited. The columns will show you how each of these tools fit in. I can show you how journaling fits in, how indifference fits in, how retraining your neural pathways fits in. I can talk about how calming the nervous system fits in. Doesn't matter what it is, it fits into this system. And to me, that in and of itself calms people down because things are making sense. So I have this overarching principle. You make sense and your symptoms make sense. I come back to that over and over and over and over because otherwise people are like, well, maybe it's random or maybe I'm different. And all of that is just doubt. That's just, nope, that's doubt's crap. Again, you make sense and your symptoms make sense reorients us to, wait a minute, let's look at this again. Now, let me say one thing about doubt and fear, because you mentioned fear. Fear is one of the forms of doubt. It is the worst form of doubt. It's the one that is the strongest, the hardest to work with at first. But I think of it as there being 4 forms of doubt. There's fear, confusion, lack of certainty, and questions. And if you think, so let's think about these 4 forms of doubt and how different they actually are. They're all doubt, but you got to work with them differently.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think of this, I have this thing that I call the fear confidence spectrum, which I mentioned in my book. This is all mentioned in my book, of course, which I would love to get to talk about. But there's this fear confidence spectrum where we want to move them out of fear and then into just confusion. Confusion doesn't sound like a great place to be, but it's actually much better than fear. It's like, okay, I'm not that afraid anymore, but I have no idea what's happening. That's confusion. Once we get them out of confusion, though, then I'm not that afraid. I'm not that confused, but I'm also not certain yet. That's lack of certainty. Then we can get them to feel more certain. Okay, I'm pretty damn certain, but I still have some lingering questions. Those lingering questions I call the gold standard of doubt. We want to get it down to questions. Then we can, that's the most workable form of doubt. It's the one where we can make the most gains, but we got to bring it down from fear and down from confusion, even down from lack of certainty. And then we can deal with all those questions.
So I'm hearing my doubt people speak to me as you're saying this. And they're saying, oh yeah, channeling them. And they're saying, I've actually been doing a lot better. I'm starting to recover. But now I'm hearing you say that I don't think this is what you said, Dan, but they're saying, you just said I'm not allowed to have doubts. I'm not allowed to be afraid. But what if but I feel fear involuntarily when my symptoms start. And sometimes I just freak out. And does that mean that I can never get better?
Okay, great question. So glad you're channeling the doubt. This is exactly what to do. What I tell people is the goal is not to have no doubt. And not only that, your expectation, my expectation anyway, of you coming into the work is that you're going to be filled with doubt, including fear. So no, we're not looking for some superhuman standard where you're not supposed to have doubt. In fact, if you think about it, what you just said is a doubt itself. It's a doubt about doubt.
Yes, it's a meta doubt.
Like, oh my God, if I have doubt, I'm not going to get better.
Yeah.
But that's presuming all kinds of things, including the fact that we're not going to work with the doubt. No, we're going to work with the doubt. You got to let the doubt in. Let the doubt in so we can look at it. But let's not let the doubt overtake us so much that we can't function.
That's right. So, and what I would typically say about that, what you just said, is it can either prevent people from functioning directly, or it causes them to engage in so many avoidant behaviors that they're not really able to implement anything at all. If you're spending your entire time trying not to have doubts, then you're spinning your wheels and wasting all your energy on combating doubts rather than doing the other things that you need to do to get better.
Yeah, let it in so that we can see it. So in the doubt column, I have these 3 steps. Observe, articulate, and counter. None of these involve not having doubt. They're totally open to the fact that we all do have doubts and we need to let them in. Observing doubt, though, means calling it into question. And that it doesn't mean not having it. It just means saying, maybe this isn't as true as I think it is. Otherwise you're just having a doubt and you're believing it. It's almost not even a doubt. You believe it as a truth. Observing it opens up space to look at it.
Yes.
Articulating it puts it into words, just what it sounds like, so that we can see, well, what is the doubt? So if you're hearing this, not only you, but your audience, what I want people to be thinking is, oh, look, there's a whole method of dealing with the doubt, and it involves letting it in. It has nothing to do with not having it. Now we're going to look at what's behind, what is that doubt? Let's get it articulated. Countering is something you're going to do later. You got to observe it. You got to articulate it. Then you might be able to counter it. But even when you counter it, you might have another doubt that pops up because of it. So here's another line. I'm full of lines, I guess.
These are good.
I got this from someone else, this one, but it's a really good one, which is, doubt is the mother of conviction. You will be much more convinced of things if you did let in the doubt. Go ahead. Let it in. Don't be afraid of letting that in, but let's look at it. We're going to work with it. Don't just let it in and let it take you over, but definitely let it in.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. What's the difference between countering and reassuring? Because I see people get stuck in these loops where they have doubts and then they're like, okay, I'm going to let the doubt in and I'm going to ruminate about it endlessly. And I'm going to try to reassure myself desperately that it's not true. That's not, I assume that's not what you mean by countering.
Definitely not. And here's the main way that I would distinguish between the form of reassuring that you're saying versus countering. It's about whether you believe it or not. So if people are saying, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, but in their minds, they don't think they're safe.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that doesn't do anything. You have to actually believe it. And, doubters out there are going to be like, but what if I can't believe it, right? Doubt works. It pops up everywhere. My job is to help you walk through the facts until it clicks in you that you truly believe it. So countering is working towards actual belief. Now, you can't force that. It comes from science and logic and working it through. Sometimes it comes from working on yourself in that power column and feeling like you can learn to trust your own reality, learn to trust yourself. These are huge components.
That's a huge component. Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, first of all, I just want you to know that that exact phrase, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, in exactly that same facial expression, I have said that exact same thing in a recent video. So it's just, I'm just tickled to death that apparently you and I are channeling the same client. But what I wanted to say was, I always say, not reassurance, but messages of safety, as people often refer to them, are a two-way conversation. You are not just sending it off into the ether and expecting it to work on yourself. The whole point is your job is to send the message and then be willing to hear how your internal environment is responding to it. So that's what you're saying. You're saying when you counter a doubt, once you've gotten past the point of actually feeling and experiencing what's going on with this doubt, which I think a lot of people don't when they're doing reassurance, they're trying to get the doubt to go away before they're willing to actually experience it. Yep. But say someone gets all the way to that point and they counter it with calm facts about, this, I actually am safe. This is a mind-body issue. It's a neural circuit problem, whatever it is. If that doesn't land, that's data. That's just useful data. That doesn't mean you did it wrong. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get rid of your doubts, or that even the objective is to get rid of your doubt at all right now. It's just, I try to ask people to see it as an experiment rather than as a fix. So
That's
wondering what
perfect.
you think of that.
No, it's perfect. I mean, I think all of this is learning to have a dialogue, primarily with yourself,
Yes.
sometimes with other people. But when people come to work with me, I often say, this is a long, I don't mean long like it's going to take a long time, but there's a lot in it. It's a dialogue. We're not going to end up at the same place that we start off with, because there's a lot of steps in between where we look at things. So if you say, I'm safe, but then the feedback that you're hearing from yourself is, but I'm not safe because, then you still got information.
Exactly.
It's all about getting the information and continuing the dialogue. When I talk about doubt, one of my main goals is, don't run off the plane of the dialogue. Don't, we got to keep going. Doubt wants you to stop talking. One of the ways I talk about doubt is it's like a somebody who's lying on the stand in a court case. The longer you have that person out there talking, the more they get exposed. So keep up the dialogue, because we're going to get information.
Oh, and this is so radically different from how people normally think about this. I love what you just said. I work with a lot of people with OCD diagnoses, or who just kind of have obsessive compulsive tendencies or what have you. And they've trained themselves, oh no, I can't listen to that. I can't listen to that because I'll get overtaken and then I'll believe it. And in fact, before they started working with it, it really was like that. It would immediately just kind of overwhelm and take over. And then they would be trying to do things to stop all these horrible, catastrophic consequences they had imagined for themselves. But what you're saying is slow down. Just you gotta experience and let that doubt actually tell you all the terrible things that could happen. And Dan, how do people then avoid being overwhelmed and overtaken by it if it is that loud? And
so you're asking some really great questions, and this one has a particular answer that I'll give you my first answer about, but we might need to continue talking about it. And notice what I just did, by the way. This is what I do when working with doubt to continue that dialogue. A lot of times people are looking for that one answer that will just end it right there. And I say, no. I'm going to give you an answer, but then I want to hear what you think about that answer. And then I want to keep talking about it. So, when it comes to obsessive thinking, I tend to have obsessive tendencies myself, so I totally get this. There are times where it really does help to be like, no, I'm not going to indulge that. So what I say is, you want to make the choice in each moment that lowers the doubt at that moment. For some moments, that's no, I'm shutting off that conversation. I'm not going there. That's okay. But you also have to have the option of, wait, hold on, I got to slow it down, let it in more, see what's there. But this is a particularly helpful intervention that I have found from a doubt standpoint. A lot of times people find they are spinning and spinning and spinning about one particular thing, and then they get the piece of evidence they need or the reassurance they need to settle that down, and guess what happens? They move right on to the next obsession. When that happens, note the process and stop thinking about the specific obsession and think about the broader picture of, do you see how you're spinning in obsessions, that this is just moving from one doubt to another?
Yep.
Now we're working more centrally on the problem at hand.
Yes. So it's not about the specifics necessarily. So I really want people to hear this. I'm underlining and highlighting what you just said. It's not necessarily about the specifics of what the doubt voice is saying to you. You're trying to look under the hood and see the whole, I call it fear logic. You're trying to see the fear logic or the doubt logic process, because it can, if you break down that actual process, then it doesn't matter what the input is. You already know what the process is going to look like. You could pop something into that machine and it'll spit out something else, and it'll pop in something else and spit out something else. The actual content doesn't matter as much as it seems like it might. So, for example, and Dan, please tell me if this is tracking with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has oh, I have a doubt that this symptom is part of a neural circuit dizziness problem. And then, oh, I have a doubt that this didn't get caused by mold. I have it like all of those things may seem on the surface like a completely different type of doubt that may need a completely different approach. But what you're saying is often these doubts are kind of all from exactly the same under the hood doubt making process. And once we start to experience the doubt over and over again, as you're suggesting, you start to kind of see, I'm going to use another metaphor, the man behind the curtain, where it's just kind of the same guy doing the same thing over and over again, just using different
Right.
information. Is that right?
That's 100% right. And then we need to know what to do about that. So
Yes.
there can
Okay.
be, well, let me just say this one thing. When I had my back pain, in many ways, I had a particular central doubt, which was, I'm damaged. There's something wrong with me. Dr. Sarno answered that for me. And this is why some people get book cures, because they really only have one doubt going on.
That's right.
And if you
Yes.
nail that, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
But most people have broader doubts,
Mm-hmm.
and at least at certain moments. And so that's how I handle my back pain. But I had other things. I had broader doubts. Those were the ones that I had to ask those questions about. And when you are finding yourself in these obsessive loops of moving from one to the next, and you can actually see the form of it, the process
Mm-hmm.
of it, this is where the power column is so helpful. Because really, we're in a cycle with ourselves. And we don't think we can do anything different because we've lived our whole lives in that cycle with ourselves. And we need to find ways to recognize, no, I can connect with myself in a different way and change what happens. I mean, people who obsess, they think of themselves as they're part of the problem. I obsess. I'm going to continue to obsess. It's never going to stop. They obsess about obsessing, and it goes on and on and on. But in the power column, if you can connect to who you really are and how you got to be the way that you are, and recognize that there are things that you actually can change about that, then you don't continue in that loop. And a huge part of it, like we referenced a bit ago, the sense of being able to trust your own reality is just massive in the power
Huge.
column.
Huge. And Dan, you can see how for dizziness in particular, this is rough because so many people have derealization, depersonalization, dissociation as symptoms that kind of are physiologic to an extent. When someone has dizziness, their brain is not using sensory information correctly. It truly is actually brain based. It's not just, oh, it's in
Sure.
my mind. But
Yeah.
so it can create its own dissociation, and then they really start to question their reality. And then they go to the doctors, and the doctor's like, or they go to doctors like, yeah, you're broken. And how is someone supposed to learn to trust reality, trust their own gut and their own physical experiences when everything seems so not reliable?
Yes, and you're the expert in this particular arena, and so I'm going to say something, and I'm going to need your feedback to see if I have this right from your vantage point. But it's a vantage point that I have on things that just might be helpful for the people in your community that are struggling with these things, and that's this: emotions column symptoms, the onsets and uptakes. What type of symptom can happen for two primary reasons. One is something in the environment happened. If someone spun you around in circles and then you developed this dizziness and then you got worried that that was going to continue, well, that's something I call a doubt trigger. It happened from the environment, but it fed you information that moved you in the direction of this symptom.
Mm-hmm.
But usually people don't develop vertigo because someone spun them around. That's usually not why it happens. In the emotions column, the symptom that happens is often a metaphor for things that are going on. So for some people, and I'd probably say a lot of people who develop vertigo or dizziness, they're having a dizzying experience in their psychologies. They can't get their bearings. They can't figure out what the reality is. So I'm thinking that these symptoms that you tend to deal with, that they're going to relate to power column stuff and not sure about reality kind of aspects more than your average symptoms.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective.
Feel
I
free to
think,
disagree. I
yeah,
really
yeah,
want to hear what you think.
yeah. So what I'm going to put in under the column of external are things like weird medical things that are physical that happened.
Oh,
Because
yep,
I
sure.
really think for a lot of my folks, they had just a freak weird ear thing, or sometimes common ear things too, by the way, that like one of the most common causes of dizziness period is BPPV, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. It's the crystals in the ear, if anyone's
Yep,
heard of
yep.
that. That doesn't cause chronic symptoms. It causes acute, short-lived
Beautiful.
symptoms, right? So it sets it off, but then it spins them into doubt, right? So that is
Exactly.
completely agree.
So
But I
sometimes it can
do
come from emotion. Sometimes it
from
can come from
yes,
environmental events of some kind. Either
that's right.
way, it's not chronic.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly right. But then I also wonder, Dan, because I'm always like, why did this person end up with chronic symptoms after BPPV, which is, by the way, it makes everyone dizzy. Everyone who has it gets dizzy.
Mhm.
But why do only some people end up with chronic symptoms after an episode? That's the real question. And to me, that's where the emotional column, I suppose, is really worth looking at, because not just, I guess I've always looked at it in kind of a neutral, like what was going on in your life. And maybe you just had like this freak thing happen, and then your nervous system was just kind of set up for chronic symptoms. So this is the one it latched onto. But I think for at least for some people, I can't speak for everyone, but at least for some people, I think there's absolutely some symbolism to the kinds of symptoms they end up with. There's no question. In particular, and because I've been asked this, in particular, it seems like areas of deep inner conflict, where you're feeling like you're being pulled in two different directions. And once again, I'm certainly not putting this on everyone, but that that seems to have come up more often in people with dizziness.
Yeah, and I find again this fits with power column work, and these columns support each other. It's one of the things that I love about it,
Sure.
that you interact one place and you bring down doubt from it making sense, whether you're making sense of an emotions column uptick or you're making sense of a power column experience. But so I have somebody I'm working with right now who has dizziness that she's had for a long time.
Mm.
It is getting better, but it also at one point it went up during the
Yes.
work. And I
Yes.
really encourage people, don't necessarily be afraid of, I mean, look, of course you're going to be afraid of it, but don't necessarily worry that that means something's going wrong. Sometimes it's the opposite. Even though it's really uncomfortable. What was happening for this particular patient that I was working with is she was in the process of recognizing that her family had been restricting her freedom for her whole life.
Mm.
Now she had to face that, and they were not happy about it. They were telling her that, she was being a terrible person. They told her she was going to hell. There were all kinds of things that were going on.
Mhm.
And they were pushing her into a corner so much where it felt like I'm not going to be able to escape this. Now, if again, I don't know how much of this is metaphoric or not. And when I say metaphoric, I don't mean made up. It's
Sure.
very real in the
Absolutely.
body, no matter what. But that is a dizzying experience. I mean, she grew up with her family being so important to her and trying to do her best. And now she's realizing there's no solution to this familial problem. So it's really interesting because a lot of times we can have the experience that it's our symptoms where there's no solution. When really, a lot of times it's about accepting there may not be a solution to a problem that's happening in that power column personal life.
Yes.
And you've got to mourn the losses.
Yep. 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 Absolutely. Is mourning okay? Sorry, I'm following you down this rabbit hole. This is a good rabbit hole.
Let's go.
So when someone, because I'm hearing the people
Yes.
following our conversation. There, they will often find, and I'm thinking about a couple clients of mine
Mhm.
who have just a whole bunch of non-negotiable stress in their lives. Just it's non-negotiable. It's not going to change. There's just no way around it, and it's not a situation necessarily that they could or would change, but it's just a lot, and it has a huge impact on them.
Mhm.
So you had mentioned potentially mourning, like working with the grief over the actual pain of the loss of whatever it is that's happening for you in that situation. What else might someone need to do to change and this is my phrasing, so please feel free to interject your phrasing. What I would say is, what else can someone do to turn that particular stressful situation into something that the nervous system isn't reacting to in the same way?
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to answer it in two different ways. The first way, I'm going to talk about mourning second,
Okay.
because there's a particular thing that I mean by that, which, when people hear mourning, they sometimes think, well, this is going to take years, or it's going to take years of therapy. That's not true. I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of what you can do, even if you can't change the situation, what you can change is the meaning of the situation. So if you change the meaning and you truly believe it, you're not in the same danger anymore. It really can be changed, even with nothing changing on the outside. If you change that interaction between you and you on the inside, it can change it. I'll give you an example. I don't know why this one is coming to mind, but I think it's really highly relevant to this kind of thing. So let's say parents with an autistic child.
They're perfect example. Yeah.
This is a situation that's not going to change. And they can get into doubt thinking, well, how am I ever going to have anything be different? Because nothing's going to change. And they're right in a sense, because nothing's going to change on the outside. But on the inside, a lot can change. That parent could be having the feeling of just raging guilt that they are angry about having this situation. They might feel resentful. They might have all kinds of feelings that are really difficult in that situation. And without realizing it, or maybe sometimes even with realizing it, they're blaming themselves for it. They're having a very, very negative interaction with themselves. Now, how does that change? Sure, we got to dig under the hood and look at what could change here. But as an example, they might be able to say, okay, wait a minute. When I'm not with this child, for example, I don't always have to be thinking about them. They might be thinking, I always have to be thinking about them. They could grant themselves that freedom. Now they're in a less stressful situation because they changed something within themselves. Or maybe it's when they're with that child saying, I'm spending all my time wishing it was different. Maybe instead I could enjoy how it is, which I know can be a challenge, but there could be aspects
Absolutely
that you could totally enjoy. And, it's like people sometimes forget to see the adorableness in that kid because they're having such a hard time. I totally get it. But if we shift what goes on inside, it can really change what goes on, in the rest of that whole internal and external environment, even though you're not changing anything on the outside. Now, let me talk about mourning briefly.
Okay.
So the power column, one of the things that I found to be really important about power column work is that it actually moves really fast comparatively. So I had over 20 years of therapy, and now I've had more than that. And it was very useful. I got all kinds of things out of it, but I didn't get that sense of internal peace that I was so looking for. In fact, I didn't even really believe I could get it. But when I got over the back pain, some things happened, and I can get into the details of the story if you want, but some things happened that made me realize things deeply about my trauma history. And to make a long story short, I realized that even though I knew intellectually that I was valid, I did not feel valid inside myself. And that was true for over 40 years. When I realized that, I realized what a tragic thing that was, that I was living with this sense of not being valid all this time when it's not even true. But it was through getting in touch with that. It's what I call getting to the fullness of your trauma, where the key line is fullness, because most people, they know about their trauma. But when you really connect to the fullness of it and feel it deeply, yes, it hurts, but it allows you to enter that mourning process. And that mourning process doesn't have to be that long. It's actually about the quality of the mourning. If you are at that fullness of your trauma, I'm not going to say it's going to happen overnight. Could be. My rule of thumb is it's usually about 2 to 3 months. And it's not like everything's horrible during that time, but it's where you're really letting it sink in. My story goes back to the fact that when I was born, my father died when I was 6 weeks old. But and obviously that's traumatic and tragic and all kinds of things, and there were all kinds of ramifications. But the one ramification that I did not see until my back pain showed it to me through these other experiences is that not having a father all that time made me feel like I actually was less valid than other people. And I just was not aware of that. So then I was sitting with it. I was like, ooh. And of course, it hurt a lot. But I've never felt invalid since. At all. 2 to 3 months.
You're describing, I don't know if you're familiar with this body of work, but memory reconsolidation right here.
Yeah. So I'm somewhat familiar with enough to know that it certainly applies here.
Yeah. You're activating the target, like an unconscious belief that's probably driving a whole bunch of other stuff, behaviors, thoughts, feelings. You're actually activating the learning from that traumatic experience. And then you're having a new experience with it. And your brain's like, wait, what? Oh, that doesn't match with what I know now. So like it's no longer.
I'm ready to let it go.
Yeah. It's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people ask me, can you actually process and move past trauma? And the answer to that is yes. It doesn't mean that you have no impact from it anymore.
Of course.
Or that it's not a part of your story. But I literally don't feel not valid. I haven't for a single second afterwards. And I also haven't gone looking for father figures like I used to at all. 0% of the time.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you. Thank you for sharing that story. That is such a powerful story and such a perfect illustration of this. That's really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing this.
Oh, my
Again,
pleasure.
I'm sure I hope you share it in your book because that's a really good story.
The whole story is in the book.
Okay, good.
The book is a third memoir, a third science and logic tearing doubt to shreds, and a third my system. It's probably a bigger portion is my system in terms of actual fractions, but it has a very strong component of me telling my story.
Good, because really what people are going to hear from what you just said, I'm hoping that what they're hearing from what you just said is, okay, so he's saying that if I have doubts, I can work with them. And then things that maybe got the symptoms started are perhaps not what's keeping them going. However, there are probably some patterns in my life that are ongoing that are disempowering me, using your words, and keeping me stuck. So this is what takes us out of the realm of, oh, I just need to react differently to my symptoms. There may be something more kind of keeping those symptoms going. And that's where, again, here in the neural circuit world, you might hear people refer to this as digging into emotional work, like Dr. Schubiner might call it emotional awareness and expression. You might hear me say something like relating to self differently, whatever that is. This is all encompassed in that. And the other message that you're saying is, if there are some of those longstanding patterns, and if there are longstanding stressors that aren't changeable, that relationship to self is still changeable, and those beliefs can still be changed. And
Perfect.
That's at the foundation of healing, even if you have done a really great job with your doubts and fears.
Absolutely. And I'll add to this, or maybe it's a point that you would totally agree with, or even are saying in this already. I mean, my symptoms, they came on because of an emotional onset. They continued because of doubt. But their overall purpose was to communicate between me and myself about how I wasn't aligning with myself. I wasn't in my own corner. And so there was a purpose to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now people's big question is just going to be, okay, how the heck do I do this? I mean, hopefully from everything that they've heard from me, this may be their first video, but if they've heard any of my other stuff, they have some ideas of how to start working on these things. I know that we could probably talk for 3 hours about how people could do this. Do you have any simple first steps people might be able to take, or just kind of some simple things people might be able to work on in the doubt column or the power column in particular that they could start implementing now?
Sure. So one thing I'll say is there's kind of a flow to my system. You learn about what these columns are, but then in terms of how to use them,
Yes.
it's bring down doubt, then learn about emotions, and then enter power.
Got it.
So, for people on here thinking, well, how am I going to do that? I want to enter power. Okay, don't rush there yet, because the first thing to do is to look at the doubt. That's always going to be the first thing. And remember I said there was that fear confidence spectrum where questions are the gold standard of doubt. The number one best thing you can do is to look at what your questions are and what questions you need answered, and find sources that can answer those questions well. And I think, your followers, that's a big reason they come to you. And that's the reason my followers come to me. Ultimately, they have questions that absolutely need to be answered. So the number one tip I can give you, anybody out there at any stage in their recovery process or how they're thinking about this, is figure out what questions you need answered. Your questions are totally legitimate. And if you go somewhere and you ask a question and they don't have an answer for it, or they think your question isn't good, or they get impatient with you or anything like that, that's just not the right helper. Find the helper who respects your questions and knows that getting them answered is important. That's the number one tip I could give. There are more, but I'll start off with that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, again, I probably talk about this using different words. I say something like, really, the foundation of absolutely everything is being educated and understanding what's going on. Like,
that's
but
it.
So then let me ask a question that I hope won't completely derail us, but I have to know. So, what about all those? I mean, questions, there can be an infinite number of questions. There are an infinite number of questions someone could ask me. What about this particular symptom? What about this eye? What about this day? What about this? So at what point is the question asking kind of an obsessive behavior that's not really helping them? Like me answering them or just providing reassurance and temporary relief rather than actually helping them move forward?
So here's a rule of thumb that I think you can use to assess that very well. When you answer the question, do they feel that there's progress? Do they feel that there's progress? If they don't, then you're in that obsessive loop. But if they do, then great. We just shrunk doubt.
That's right. Okay. And this is to differentiate, again, for those of you out there with OCD and obsessive compulsive patterns, that's not the same as feeling a huge rush of relief anytime I answer a question, only to have a similar or different question show up 5 minutes later. That's not actually making progress.
No, it's does it stick? Like,
does it really stick? Thank you.
Really stick? Yeah.
Does it stick? That's a great rule of thumb. Okay.
Because here's a good example of that. So I read Sarno, and then I was getting better, but I wasn't getting all the way better. And I was doing these back exercises that a chiropractor had once showed me. And I'm doing them, and I'm thinking to myself, why am I doing these? Which is not to say stretching's bad at all, but I just was like, why am I doing these? I've learned from Dr. Sarno that there's nothing wrong. I shouldn't need to do these. And I asked myself this question: do you believe in this or not? And that question I asked myself, it was addressing a question that I was having within myself. And I was able to say to myself, I do. So I don't need to do these exercises, and I don't need to get up slowly from them. It was a definitive answer where I was at peace about that particular question.
Yeah.
Did it stick? So if it's not sticking, we know something underneath needs to be addressed. Usually that ends up being a power issue, actually.
Okay. Thank you. That was going to be my next question, because I'm hearing the people, and they're saying, the doubts that I'm channeling, and they're saying, okay, but I keep breaking my teeth against these stupid doubts and questions, and I'm just spinning my wheels over and over again, and they just keep popping up, and I keep sitting with them, and they just keep coming back. And what you're saying is, then we need to focus our attention a little more on the power column, which is more about how you relate to yourself.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that the power column does is it helps you see how you're relating to doubt. So if you're doing doubt column work and you're getting your questions answered and doubt is lowering, then things are going great.
Great. Yep.
But if you're doing doubt column work and you're like, I'm never going to get there, then we're dealing with, okay, so actually here's a helpful concept that all of this is in my book, but I talk about there being 3 levels of doubt. Level 1 doubt is, do I have a mind-body issue or not? Level 2 doubt is, I know I have a mind-body issue, but is my mind-body issue harder to tackle than others? You get that in your community.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Yeah.
And then let's say people move beyond that. And then they're like, okay, I know it's a mind-body issue. I know that my mind-body issue isn't harder to conquer than others, at least intellectually, even if they are having, a struggle with it. Level 3 doubt is, but can I do it?
There's something wrong with me.
Something wrong with me.
Yes.
When you get level 3 doubt, I always move straight to the power column. I'm like, we're going to work on that there.
Brilliant. That tracks totally with how I would think about things too. Again, phrased very differently from how I normally talk about it, but that's exactly it. If the real doubt is, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm uniquely broken? Then we're not really in like information gathering phase anymore. We're in there something about the relationship with yourself that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times people like that will say, well, can you give me a study that shows this? But then we're dealing with science and logic when the doubt is about yourself. And
that's right. Exactly.
The science and logic isn't going to answer your doubts about yourself. But in my language, power column work will. There's ways to do it, outside of my system, but within my system, that's where we would do it.
Yeah. Ugh. I could talk to you for hours about this. I feel like I had this whole list of questions I wanted to get to, and we just scratched the very tip of the surface of some of the questions. Cause I mean, I could really talk to you all day. This was so awesome.
Same way.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait to hear more from you. I hope we can continue this conversation another time.
I was going to say, let's do a part 2. I mean, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I would love that. And I'm really interested in hearing what you, listening audience, takes away from this and wants to understand more about. But before you ask questions, I do suggest everyone buy your book. So can you give a little bit more information about where people can get your book right now?
Yeah. So the best place to get my book is on my website, but at a particular link. It's www.crushingdoubtbook.com.
Okay. And we'll put that in the podcast and video description so people know they can just click.
Beautiful. There's actually 2 other offerings that you can get through this, as opposed to normally you'll be able to buy on Amazon. We're having a little technical issue for the next couple of days. I don't know when people will be seeing this, so that may be long past.
Right. It'll be past. Yeah.
But if you come to my website, you can get a copy of the book. You can also get a signed copy of the book if you'd like. Not forcing that on anybody, but if people want that. And there's an offer to get my teaching seminars at a much lower rate if you buy one of those books. So just it's a promotional offer that's there right now. But again, it's www.crushingdoubtbook.com.
Awesome. Yeah, because this, again, what we talked about today, again, was really just a high level overview of some of the work you do. And in the book, there's a step-by-step process that will walk you through how to address each of these columns. And also you have some wonderful stuff on your YouTube channel. I highly recommend people go there. There are full sessions. So if you want to see what this looks like in practice and you're like, I don't know, like, how does this actually look? You can actually see there are playlists with the full sessions. You can see exactly how it looks with an actual client. So I warmly recommend those too.
Well, thank you so much. And I just encourage everybody, keep asking your questions. One of the things that I did in this book is tried to anticipate every question it's every question I ever asked, which is a lot. And it's one of the reasons that the editing took so long. Originally, this book was really long, but I tried to give the reader everything that I wished I had when I was going through this.
Yeah.
So there are very, very practical things in there because, of course, that's what I would have wanted. I read Sarno and I was like, but take me through step by step, please.
Right.
And I do. Right in this book, I'll take you through the whole thing.
That's exactly why I have my YouTube channel. And, Dan, just talking to you makes me realize, like, that's why people come to my channel. And that's why I was doing this without really thinking about why I get so freaking specific in my videos. this is why you have this particular kind of visual symptoms, like 15 minutes of an explanation, and where I go through like the entire vestibular system.
Because
It's
somebody
so
needs
that
that.
someone needs me to explain because no one else has. And where else are they supposed to get this information? From sources that tell them, oh yeah, and this is a permanent condition, and which is, it's just not it's not true. There's no accurate medical sources out there that actually go into the kind of depth that I go into about why people have symptoms. So I feel validated, but I also then want other people who are listening to this to feel validated. Like, that's why I have my entire channel has pretty much any symptom you can imagine. I have one video that's just a list of symptoms. It's 20 minutes of me basically reading off of a list of symptoms. So I have all that out there so that you know.
Yeah. By the way, I have a list of symptoms in my book also.
Excellent.
And I tried to make it extremely extensive because I know, what are people going to say if their symptom isn't there?
That's right. Exactly. They'll say, oh, well, I'm the exception, or this doesn't apply to me.
Hopefully, I mean, it went on for, I don't know, 3-4 pages. It was long.
Oh yes. That's so funny. I just love when I meet someone from the neural circuit community and it turns out we've reached exactly the same conclusions, even though we've never spoken before. It's just,
I know.
It's because I mean, it means that we're doing something right, I guess. Or yeah. Okay. So huge thank you to you, Dan. Again, links to everything we talked about today in the video and podcast description. For those of you listening, watching, please ask your questions in the comment section, and we will do a part 2 if you're interested. So please let us know. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please consider heading over to YouTube. You can also leave questions and comments there, so you could be part of the conversation. As always, if you could like, share, subscribe to my channel, these things help me reach more people, very important to me. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please give us a follow and a 5-star rating. Again, those things also really help me reach more people. So again, thanks to all of you for sticking with us today. Thank you, Dan. We'll talk to you guys soon. Take care, everyone.